So, hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Fugitive Chefs podcast. Today we have a very special guest, and I will tell you more about why do I say a special guest. But first of all, before anything else, let's welcome Giusti. Thanks a lot for accepting this invite, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So yeah, as I said, why do I say special? And I think there are a few times I've said this because most guests I've had on the podcast, many of them I haven't met in person. I've just seen their stories inspiring and I just reach out to them. Whereas in Dan's case, it's one of the few profiles which I had thought of because as I have shared during the podcast, also I've been very vocal in my Instagram or socials, is that I started this podcast with the idea that when I left Noma, this was 3 years ago, my situation of leaving Noma is very different from Dan's, which he will share later. But mine were around like immigration and paperwork and also just thinking what's beyond in a country where you've gone. You're working for its most esteemed restaurant, earning a salary over there, not just interning, contributing to the economy, and then you get told that you'll be deported if you don't leave the country in the next 2 months. And my situation there was, what else can I do? Because I don't want to go back to restaurants. I could do that back in Spain, but I thought that, like, I think many people think about those points in their career or their life, like there could be a career break or go for a travel or a trip. And for me, it was I still have to keep paying bills and have to work next month. But what else can I do beyond restaurants? And that's where it started. And I was like, else do I know who has done similar pivots? And Dan was one of them. I thought of David Zilber. I thought of Lars from Empirical. Yeah, they're all coming from a Noma past because that was my context in that case. But which is why I say it's very special, Dan. So for me, it's super super special that I have been thinking of this to have you on the podcast, following you a lot, sharing a lot of the things which are very iconic. I think the way you share your small notes on your Instagram, I really like it.
Thank you.
I think I'll start with the first one of them, the most recent one of them I saw, which was about how people should just, or cooks should just get done with the idea of just calling people chef and chef and chef, which is why I haven't said Chef Dan, because for me, it's a little still uncomfortable because I come like, my career started back in India, where saying the word chef is very common. Then I was in France, where it's very common. And then Noma and Mugaritz normalized the idea of calling Andoni, Andoni, calling Rene, Rene.
Yeah.
What was that post about? Let's just begin there.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, as much as I loved my time at Noma, there was a habit when I was there of people calling each other chef all the time. And to be honest, I think the reason, and some people alluded to it in the comments, but I think the reason there was we had so many folks working there, and as you know, many were interns and would be there for a limited period of time. And I think not everybody knew everyone's name, to be fair. So it was easy, hey, chef, chef, chef. And when I became the head chef, obviously I was in a place of authority in a way. I would tell folks, like, say this person's name. Not because I was against the term chef, but I thought it as a kind of a lazy way to interact with people. So that post got a lot of interesting feedback. And there are a lot of people like, no, we use it for this reason and that reason. For me, it was just like, people have names and they should be called by their name. And I think whether you're calling someone chef or because you think of it a certain type of terminology or it's because you forgot their name, I think it can get all kind of blurred. And when everyone's going around just being like chef, 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 I don't know. I think there's something that it takes away from who a person is. I think you can also argue it could take away from what that word even means at some point. And I'm the last person to say like, oh, we have to prop up this word chef, but it should have a meaning. It should have a meaning. And I do think that not to go off on a tangent, but I do think this is a conversation I had recently with someone. I think there is a big distinction between being a cook and being a chef, and not to say one's better than the other, but I think it's very different. And I think, the conversation I was having is I think you can be a really good cook and not be a very good chef. And I think you can be a very good chef and not be a very good cook. And I think the latter opinion is something that I think a lot of people disagree with me on that. But I think I'm a very good example of someone who, when I was at Noma, I was the head chef, and by no means was I the best cook, not even remotely close to being the best cook, but I was the head chef. So I think I'm a good example of that. I've never been the best cook, but I think when it comes to managing people, creating systems, getting the best out of other people when it comes to cooking, I think I'm good at that. Anyway, I went off on a tangent there. I apologize.
No, no, please don't. I mean, this podcast, if it's anything about, it's all about tangents. So let's just make all the tangents. Because also, I wanna tell this to the audience who's listening that I feel Dave Chang has recently done an episode with you, and I think that podcast it's a longer one, an hour and a half. I think that covers your career very beautifully. So I would say people who were listening to this and interested in Dan's career, and also how Dave has a very personal connection with you. I think that's super interesting to see that. But also, what you've said right now reminds me of that episode as well, because I think what I see as an outsider listening to you or listening how you even approach the small topic of being a chef, I think what sets you out in my eyes as somebody aspiring to be someone like you, aspiring to inspire more people who take pivots like you in a career, is that I think there's an absence of ego or an absence of
Mm,
being too personal about I achieved this or I did this, which
sure.
or that being the only talking point you have in a conversation, because you could comfortably start a conversation all the time being that I was the head chef at Noma, but I
Sure.
don't see that like now for the past few years. I don't see that very often coming from you. I think
Yeah.
only then it's possible because the Noma I was in, nobody was called chef. Only Kenneth, who was the head chef at that time, we used to call him chef. And I feel in that sense, it makes it very. I mean, if we literally work like an army, like a military operation, at times, and a lot of communication is what makes what makes the boat float. And if you're not calling
Sure.
out names, I think that's going to be a complete disaster. But I think
That's a good point. Yep.
yeah. Before going further beyond with this, I feel people listening to it who maybe do not know who you are, Dan. So just for me to tell them, Dan is somebody who was, as we heard now, ex-head chef at Noma, and today runs this business called Brigade. Business, organization, institution. You also had recently the Brigade Summit, which also sticks out. Not every business has a summit for it. Not every business has a cause which is a noble cause or something morally on the right path what the business needs. So that's who Dan is, and that's why Dan is on the podcast, because he's clearly somebody who's a fugitive. I don't think Dan today wears an apron every day or cooks every day or meets
No.
a guest every day. But tell us, Dan, what is Brigade? Let's start with that first.
Yeah, it's a pretty simple concept. Essentially, Brigade is a, I think it's important to say it is a business. It is a
Mm-hmm.
for-profit business. We haven't been very profitable yet, and that was
Mm-hmm.
never the goal, but it is a for-profit business, so that's important to distinguish, where we place professional chefs into institutional food service settings, like in a public school, like in a prison system or a senior center, to help the existing kind of food service operation reach their goals. And their goals are usually really just improving the quality of food. In many cases, these operations are oftentimes serving what is primarily a lot of processed and packaged foods, and they're looking to figure out a way to cook more in-house, more from scratch. So our chefs are working with them to do that, and it's a full-time endeavor. We hire chefs, they work for Brigade, and then we place them in these institutions, and they work there full-time for multiple years as these transitions take time. And some of the organizations we work with, some of the school districts, for example, have over 100 schools, over 100 kitchens, just
Mm-hmm.
one. So it's a big undertaking, but that in a nutshell is what we do. So it's pretty simple. We're basically looking at all the principles we have as professional chefs in a well-run kitchen that you would see in a restaurant or a hotel, and say that those best practices are happening in those places to make sure that the kitchen runs well, that the food that comes out of the kitchen is timely and tasty, taking those things and applying them to institutional settings, which, for a variety of reasons, those kitchens oftentimes are not operating that way. Not because the people who work there aren't great, because they are. It's oftentimes, I say it's a thing I've said many times, is that institutional food is the way it is, not because of the people who've chosen to work in it. It's because of the people who have not chosen to work in it,
Mm-hmm.
which are chefs. A lot of chefs do not choose to work in institutional food, which again, if you look at who a chef is a person who's been trained to cook, a person who's been trained to train other peoples to cook, to oversee operations that produce food. And if you say let's take chefs out of the mix, it makes it hard to do these things. So essentially what Brigade is doing is trying to get more chefs to go into these spaces.
Mm-hmm. And do you just take care of, like, say, this matchmaking between chefs and institutional catering, or are you also, like, I don't know, consulting them on what equipments they should have, what should be a kitchen like, sort of?
100%. So our chefs are doing this is another thing I think about. Like when we
Mm-hmm.
first place a chef and we talk to, say, a school district and they say, we're excited about having a chef. I think the perception is a chef is someone who's going to come in and they're going to help train staff to cook, and they're going to come up with recipes, and that's it. That's a big part of what we do. But as we know, chefs are very resourceful people, and they can provide a lot of value in a lot of ways. So we're doing everything that you could think a chef would do in any type of kitchen. So yes, we're training staff. Yes, we're coming up with recipes. We're helping these organizations source the ingredients they're using. We're helping organize the kitchens. We're
Mm-hmm.
advising on which equipment to buy. We're advising how to set up the kitchen. We're implementing systems. So I always like classify a lot of these things as like the boring stuff. You know, like the outside folks want to hear about like scratch cooking and cooking seasonal food and this and that. But for me, so much of the value we provide as chefs in these institutions are these very infrastructural things. Again, setting up systems of organization, food safety, the stuff that's so integral to any professional kitchen. We do all that as well, which again I think is some of the most important work we do.
Hmm. And Dan, I mean, I have so many follow up questions for this business model that you're talking about.
Yeah,
But let's take us behind this, like behind Brigade,
yeah.
before Noma. Where do you think like food could be a career option, or what was the first few career options you thought coming out of school, or how did that pan out?
Yeah, food. Being a chef was the only, well, not the only. I mean, as a child, I had a variety of things. I think at one point I wanted to be an archaeologist because
Okay.
of Indiana Jones, and then I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be a professional soccer player because I played soccer. But the first real career that was feasible was a chef. I
Mm.
grew up in a big Italian family, and food has always been important. At that age, when I was young, obviously eating it, I wasn't cooking the food, but
Mm-hmm.
I have one aunt in particular who is, she doesn't take it serious, but she's a very serious cook and she cooks excellent till this day. And when we ate at her house, and still to this day, the food was always good. And the older I got, and when I mean older, at this time I'm like 11, 12, 13, I just kind of recognized that eating at her house was different than eating at other people's houses, including my own. My mother's my favorite person on earth, but she admittedly she's not passionate about cooking. So
Mm-hmm.
I am okay saying okay saying that. But my one aunt, the food she makes is incredible. And like I said, the older I got, the more I started kind of thinking about why. Why is the food that she makes so good? And then I started to kind of just appreciate that it was a different thing. And I think the more I appreciated that it was a different thing, and the more I saw and recognized how by her cooking she made so many people happy and everyone wanted to eat at her house. When you ate
Mm-hmm.
at her house, you knew you were going to get a good meal. That really excited me about the prospect of cooking. And when I went into high school, so I was 14, I went to a high school that was a very competitive high school. So that first year of high school, everyone was already talking about where they're going to college, what do they want, and I hadn't really thought about where I wanted to go to college, or for that matter, what I wanted to do. I was still kind of growing out of that phase, recognizing I probably wasn't going to be a professional soccer player. And I was like, you know what, maybe I should think about cooking. And I went to a career fair, and there was a representative there from a culinary school. And I
Mm-hmm.
spoke to her, and she said, if you're serious about this, you should get a job because cooking at home is very different than cooking in a professional kitchen. So I got a job in a restaurant local to Washington, D.C., because that's actually where I went. I grew up, was going to high school, and I loved working in the restaurant. So apart from kind of this passion I had and saw from my aunt and what that was all about, working in a restaurant and the environment of working in a restaurant, it was busy and you're running around, and I loved it. I always equated working in a restaurant, even through my days at Noma, as kind
Mm-hmm.
of like playing a sport. I always felt it like it was kind of like playing a sport, and I really loved it. And kind of, I would say after the first few months of working there, of literally peeling potatoes, cutting onions, doing prep
Mm-hmm.
work, I think I was pretty hooked on like I never really considered another career. That was kind of it at that
Okay.
point, and I was probably 15.
And then like from that age, that point, being 15, when you were told to, like, if you want to follow food, restaurant is the place where you should be.
Yeah,
And
right.
after now, like being in restaurants of all scales, of being into now institutional catering, how much of it, as somebody who's been through that channel now, you would you say if somebody come up to you and say has a passion for cooking, would that
Yeah.
be your first advice to them? Because for me, who has been maybe for a much shorter amount of than you in restaurants, in all hotels, restaurants, standalone restaurants, and now in an R&D kitchen, I wonder if that is itself enough. How much of that advice is true today to somebody who you speak to who's passionate about food?
Yeah, I think if you well, if you I talk to people actually relatively often. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty common to actually talk to people who are changing careers. They're like
Mm-hmm.
24, 25, 26. They went to university, they got a job, and they're very passionate about cooking. I think, first of all, I don't think going into a restaurant is necessarily what you need to do. I think you need to learn how to cook.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to learn how to cook somewhere. So I don't think, unfortunately, for example, there's some folks who come to us and they're like, I want to become a chef. Can I come work with Brigade or should I go work in a school? And
Mm-hmm.
my answer is no. Like, I don't think most institutional settings right now are the best place to learn how to cook if you don't know how to cook,
Right.
because a lot of them are just starting to do more cooking themselves. I think even if your goal is not to work in a restaurant, again, you need to learn how to cook somewhere. And
Mm-hmm.
it's either you go to school, which I think is an option. I went to culinary school. If I could do it again, I think there's another way to do it. And I think what I would advise people is to go work somewhere. And it's probably, to be honest, it's probably a restaurant, but it's probably a high volume restaurant
Mm-hmm.
that is set up in a way where it's not fine dining. You're gonna cook, more basic foods, salad dressings and soups and make sandwiches and make basic foods, but you're gonna make them a lot. You're gonna do it a lot of repetition. And in those types of restaurants, there's a menu that's a varied menu, so you get exposed to a lot of things. But I think obviously we know with cooking or any craft, like repetition is key.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing you really don't get in culinary school. I always tell the story that I remember in culinary school in butchery class. I learned how to cut a leg of lamb one time,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't even by myself. I split cutting the leg of lamb with a classmate. So I didn't
Mm-hmm.
even cut a leg of lamb one time. And I went to the Culinary Institute of America, which, in the United States is considered like, the top culinary school in a lot
Definitely.
of circles. And that was my experience there. And of course, it costs a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that if you need to learn how to cook. So back to the to answer your question,
Mm-hmm.
I do think no matter what career you want to take in food, whether you're an influencer, whether you want to work in an institution, whether you want to work in a restaurant, I think you need to learn how to cook.
Mm-hmm.
And even like these days, like sometimes I speak to culinary classes or even folks who are taking like food studies classes at university, and a lot of them are looking to get into food in kind of a more intellectual way. Like there's a lot of students in culinary schools now who you could tell right out of culinary school, like they don't want to be in the kitchen. They're like trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure out like what career can I do that's not in the kitchen, which
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing wrong with that. But I think as someone who wants, like, for example, if you want to start a business, I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to in the last 10 years who've come to me and they're like, oh, I'm starting this business and we're making this food product or we're doing this, and they don't know how to cook themselves. So the main function of their business is a product that if they knew how
Mm-hmm.
to cook, they would be able to really work on it, but they are seeking outside advice to help them
Mm-hmm.
understand. So I guess what I'm getting at is knowing how to cook is like at the core of all of these different types of businesses. But if you don't know how to cook and you're kind of it's all like theoretical, I think you're at a loss. So my
Yeah.
advice to anyone who wants to get into a food career, even if it's developing a product, you should learn how to cook first, and I think you'd be much better off. And I think again, there's only a few ways to genuinely learn how to cook right now.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. And I would actually even go further and say that what you said about repetition and how you'll get better at it yourself and you'll also keep learning, keep getting better. And that's why you need to start lower into lesser complicated things. But I would also go in further and say that by doing that, by doing those repetitions, you would know the biggest answer to any question. Do you want to be in it or not? Because if not, what's the point of spending I mean,
100,
CIA is not cheap.
100%,
Where I work is not cheap. So that's a big factor.
100%.
You will open your eyes.
Yes, that's 100% right. I think that was kind of the advice from the the representative from the culinary school that I met when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
like, you need to see if this is really for you because even culinary school, like, to be fair, like, culinary school is set up in such like a, I mean, there are some culinary schools I feel that are set up in a more practical way. But
Mm-hmm.
like when you go to the Culinary Institute of America, it is like this beautiful campus and the kitchens are beautiful. And you could go there and probably not really be like cut out to want to work in a restaurant, but go
Mm-hmm.
there and come out and be excited to go through 2 years of culinary school and then come out and be like, wait a minute, like working in a restaurant is not what I thought it was going to be like. So yeah, I think making sure that your investment is something that is worth it. It's probably worth just going to work in some kind of high volume place for sure.
Exactly. No, definitely, definitely. Knowing that fact, I mean, knowing that answer is pretty important if you want to keep continuing in this career, which requires a lot of passion. It's not you can't equate the salaries, you can't equate the working hours. It's getting better now, but you can't equate any of that.
That's
No,
it. And
please.
one thing I
Mm-hmm.
get frustrated about is, you often hear people that are, and this is like such a topic these days, people who are talking about like, the restaurant industry, I work in a kitchen, it's terrible, it's too many hours, you don't get paid enough. Look, I am as someone who runs a business, we pay people well.
Mm-hmm.
I think you should pay people well. You should treat people well. You should make sure people are happy. All these things, like
Mm-hmm.
1,000,000%. But I just don't understand that like people choose to work in restaurants and then they complain about it. Like
Mm,
it's a hard career. Like I
definitely.
actually enjoyed working in restaurants. I enjoyed working in restaurant kitchens. I liked working in restaurant kitchens. I don't think it's for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But I also see as someone who runs a business who provides other options for chefs where we pay a good amount of money, we provide benefits, we provide a better schedule. People still choose not to do that and they choose to work in restaurants. So I don't have much sympathy for people who work in restaurants who then complain about it. Like that's a choice. You
No,
can choose
definitely.
to work in restaurants, or you can choose to work in this restaurant versus this restaurant. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's weird to me to want to like to choose to work in a restaurant and want that restaurant to be everything you want it to be. You want it to be the best restaurant in your city, but you also want it to pay really well. And you also want it to be a great schedule. It's just not how the world works anywhere. It's very
Definitely.
odd to me. So I just think that people should think a little more critically about where they want to fit into the food system.
Mm-hmm. And then, like on that note, like when you came out of like your first few years at CIA, you finished the degree. I guess you did some externships while you were there. What was the first kind of restaurants you worked at? Like having all this because I think CIA also opens a lot of doors, right? So like, I mean, you had options. What are the places you ended up at?
Yeah, so just starting with like I did my externship at Oriole, which was a
Mm-hmm.
restaurant. And so I graduated culinary school in 2004, so my externship was 2003. That was a Charlie Palmer restaurant, New York City at the time, a more notable restaurant. It was definitely on the tail end of its popularity. I think it was more
Mm-hmm.
popular in like the mid 90s, but it was like a busy fine dining restaurant in Manhattan. That
Mm-hmm.
would like you know, I will say it was like a real restaurant though. There was like five people cooking on the line, and it was supposed to be fine dining. It was busy. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like like a Noma where you have a lot of people. It was like five people on a line cooking. So that was a great experience. And then immediately following culinary school, I actually went to Italy for a year. I
Mm-hmm.
worked in a Michelin star restaurant that was kind of a funny restaurant in the sense that during the week we would do like 5 to 6 covers a night, like nothing, literally nothing. And then on the
Okay.
weekends we would do these like big banquets. But it was a great chance to learn how to make like, for example, we had a menu, but nobody would really follow the menu. Like guests would come in and they'd be like, I know porcini mushrooms are in season, so can I get raw porcini mushrooms on a plate with Parmesan cheese and olive oil? And we would just do it. So that was like a neat thing to kind of see what that was like. But not after Italy, so this is something I did for a few years. The restaurant that I got a job at when I worked in high school was at a restaurant group called Clyde's Restaurant Group, which
Okay.
it's a Washington D.C. area chain, if you will. It's about, I think there are 12 restaurants. So it's not like a
Mm-hmm.
chain like everywhere. It's 12 restaurants, and that's where I worked in high school. And then after Italy, I actually went back to work for them in one of
Mm-hmm.
their restaurants that had about 550 seats. And I was a sous chef and I was 20 years old and I was overseeing people and it wasn't fine dining. It was very casual food. I mean, we're talking casual here.
Uh-huh.
And to me, like, not to skip ahead, but I worked in restaurants for 20 years.
Uh-huh.
And half of the 20 years I worked in restaurants, I worked for that restaurant group.
Oh
And
wow.
no one's ever, you've never heard of it. Most people have never heard of it, but it's a very successful restaurant group.
Uh-huh.
And I honestly think that by working there, it gave me an upper hand in my career in general. Very high volume, very busy, very successful, very oriented on systems, which I
Uh-huh.
think is really important, which I think oftentimes in particularly independent restaurants can get away from having systems because they don't need them. They can kind of get
Yeah.
away without them, if you will. But I worked there. I was, a kid, and then I worked for they have like a fine dining restaurant called 1789. I worked there. And then I went to Las Vegas. So I went back. Like, I kind of had this like identity crisis. I was like, I like working in this setting of Clyde's, this like high volume, casual environment, but I always kept going back to this like, it was kind of a confidence thing. Like, am I good enough to work at the highest levels? So then
Uh-huh.
I went to Las Vegas. I was like 23 to Guy Savoy. So in like
Okay.
2007, I think it was like 2006, 2007, all the big French chefs, Guy Savoy, Joe Robuchon, they all opened restaurants in Las Vegas. And I was excited about that. So I went and worked at Guy Savoy. And that was the first time I think I worked at like a really like kind of intense fine dining restaurant. Like, we had
Uh-huh.
carpet in the kitchen. We all wear, Bragard jackets, and we had granite countertops and the Molteni range, and it's just like a different level of a kitchen. And I really loved it. I loved it. I didn't like Las Vegas, but I liked that restaurant. So I got a little taste. That was like the first time I think I really got a taste of like true fine dinings. And then I mean, it's not a long story. Then I went back to 1789, this restaurant in DC. I became the head chef. I was
Uh-huh.
there for about 3 years, and then I went to Noma. So like, I kind of
Yeah.
went back and forth. I kind of went back and forth of like high volume, more casual, but
Yeah.
I felt the need to like prove myself.
And before we get into Noma, Dan, I would like to hear, because one thing that sticks out to me I mean, at least in my context, when I see it, when somebody's young and stepping into a role like being a sous chef at a one like 550 cover restaurant, I bet you were heading a team of people older than you, people who maybe not
Oh
been in
yeah.
a culinary school, more experienced than you. How does that come? Because that's what you spoke earlier about, like people being great cooks and being great chefs. How do you take that personally? Did you do things like which many of us do, of hiding the age, acting older, not letting that
Maybe
question
so.
ever come up, or how did you get past that role?
I think I think I had a lot of tough times. I think I've always tried to be like a nice person,
Uh-huh.
and there's no question that there's no hiding my age. I think people saw I was young.
Uh-huh.
I think all I could do in those settings was recognize that people that I was managing had more experience than me. Whether
Uh-huh.
they went to culinary school or not didn't really matter. Like, these are people who had more experience than me in the kitchen. They had way more experience than I did in life. And I think I had a lot of moments that showed that, I try to be like in my position. It's hard. It's a hard thing to do because you have a job to do. So you've been put in this position,
Uh-huh.
but surely you make a lot of mistakes where you kind of overstep, or you say something where clearly you're kind of out of your depth. Like,
Uh-huh.
you're not really you're not really maybe the right. I don't want to say you're not the right person for the job, but at the same time, I think that I always say this, like, working in a restaurant, because the other thing is like in a fine dining restaurant, let's say Noma,
Uh-huh.
you don't really need to manage. You don't need to manage anyone because everyone has gone through a lot to get there, and
Right.
everyone's doing whatever they need to do what's right. And if you're working in a high volume environment, it's oftentimes you have a lot of folks that this is a career, this is a job for them. And not to say that they can't care a lot, because I think no matter where you should work, where you work, whether someone wants to be a chef or not be a chef, hopefully everyone cares what they're doing,
Uh-huh.
and they're being thoughtful about it. But you need to really manage folks. You need to get that out of them sometimes, because maybe someone's just there because it was a good job, and then they're just there and they're not doing things the way they're meant to be done. And you have to act. You have to actually hold people accountable, which, if you don't have to hold people accountable, which I think in a place like Noma, you don't really have to. Everybody's just kind of
Yeah.
doing everything they need to do. Holding people accountable is very challenging. It's the hardest thing, and like being consistent. And I think when you're 20 years old, 19 years old, you don't even know how to do that properly. So I
Mm.
think for me, I don't think I was very successful. I think I relied on being a respectful person, being nice
Mm-hmm.
to people, but surely that didn't make me an effective manager. I think that I was able to hold the line enough where, again, I followed the rules, I was respectful, I worked very hard, but I don't think by any means, like if I look at myself now and the way I think of things versus then. And honestly, when I went to Las Vegas and I came back from Las Vegas and was the chef of this restaurant, I started when I was 24. Most of
Mm.
the people in that restaurant were older than me, particularly in the front of the house. The
Mm-hmm.
front of the house team there had been there for a long time, and they really didn't like me. They actually really didn't like me. I think when I came back from Las Vegas, I had a chip on my shoulder. I'd worked in this fancy restaurant. I was back from Las Vegas, and I really probably made every mistake you could make as like a young chef. I was changing everything on the menu that, they were like, this was the kind of restaurant that like every president of the United States would eat at, politicians would eat at. It had been there for 40 years. It was a busy restaurant, and it was the kind of restaurant that people came for certain things. Like at the time it
Mm-hmm.
was rack of lamb, it was creme brulee, it was Caesar salad, these kinds of things. And instead of coming in and being and recognizing like, okay, this is what people come here to eat, I took all those things off the menu. I
Oh
took
wow.
them all off the menu, put other things on the menu, and just, I wasn't very patient with
Mm-hmm.
people. Like I said, I probably made every mistake you could make as a chef. And I think for that reason, a lot of people didn't enjoy being around me. I don't think I did a very good job. I don't think I was a very good chef, both in terms of management and in terms of the food. So, to answer your question again, is I don't think I did a good job. Like I think that's a really challenging place to be. And I
Mm.
would suggest to anyone, it's of course easier said than done. If you're 22 years old, 23 years old, and you get
Yeah.
offered a head chef position, you're like, yeah, I'm going to take it. And I'm not saying that there aren't people out there who could do that and be great at it,
Mm-hmm.
but I also think it's very difficult because I don't care who you are, when you're 21, 22, 23, both from a cooking perspective, but also from a life perspective, a maturity perspective, it is the likelihood that you're in a place where you can command the attention and get the buy-in of a large group of people who's older than you and more experienced than you both in cooking and in life. It's low. Like it's a
Yeah.
hard thing to do.
No, definitely. And how do you factor in, like, because you also mentioned like having a chip on your shoulder, and there comes also your alma mater. I think CIA does open you a lot of doors, but you
Sure.
can't deny that it also is a thing with you there. I mean, not just seeing somebody who's their boss and is 19 or 20, but also knowing they come from the school, and
Sure.
this factors in because that's something which happened for me. With India, for example, in my context, is very common. College, like culinary arts graduates, end up being head chefs or sous chefs at hotels straight out of
Right.
college and
Right.
commanding a
Right.
team
Right.
of people who are great cooks but can't use a computer, can't make duty rosters, can't
Sure.
order ingredients. So that's why they end
Sure.
up there, and that's a very uncomfortable position, which is why I left India in the first place. But how was that for you? Does CIA factor in that step of I don't know, balance, ideology, and stuff?
I'm sure when I was younger and like people knew like, oh, this person went to culinary school and now they're
Mm-hmm.
like a chef, I'm sure it did. In retrospect, like, yeah, that's such a thing out of like culinary school. It's tough because like culinary schools become this thing where it's like they need to justify like what you can do out of culinary school because they're charging you X amount of money. So they're like, yeah, out of
Right.
culinary school you can become a sous chef at, like you said, it
Mm-hmm.
is like that's where a lot of people out of culinary school end up, sous chefs at big corporations, because that's
Yeah.
kind of like their job description. Like the job requirements oftentimes is like culinary school. Like for example, when we work with institutions, they're always like, what are your requirements for your chefs? And they always say like, have they all gone to culinary school? I'm like, no, we don't care less about culinary school. Like that's the last thing we're looking for is culinary
Mm-hmm.
school. But I do think that culinary school, like I remember when I was doing my internship or externship,
Mm-hmm.
whatever they call it, during school, that was like a real stereotype. Like you're the kid from culinary school who thinks he knows everything. Like those restaurants that are often seeing people from culinary school, there is a very negative stereotype. it's a very negative stereotype of
Mhm.
like a young person who doesn't have that much experience. And obviously not everybody going to culinary school is like at the beginning, like is a young person, if you will.
Yeah.
But I think they're I'll also say, on a tangent, the people I went to culinary school with who are not like they were career changers, they were by
Mhm.
far the best students. Like I had people in my, I was 18 when I went to culinary school. The other folks who were like 25, 26, 27, 30, I had a guy who
Mhm.
was like 45. They were the best students. They were serious. They were like, I've made a conscious effort to leave whatever I was doing, and now I'm doing this, and I'm serious. Whereas you're 18, you're 19, you're kind of joking around, you're learning how to cook. But yeah, I don't think the perception in general within the industry
Mhm.
of culinary school is positive. I don't think it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever talked to anybody within the industry who's like,
Mhm.
oh, you went to culinary school, nice. It's more outside of the industry where
Mhm.
people are like, "Oh, culinary school."
Yeah.
Like, "Oh, that's cool. That's interesting." Or this person's a chef because they went to culinary school. Within the industry, it's kind of a funny thing. I really think it's not, I don't think it's that positive of a thing, you know?
No, and I think that's the most ironic thing. And of course, I have to also add that now the proportion is changing. So now, when you walk into most restaurants, at least where I am in Spain, most of the staff, the proportion of chefs from culinary school is higher. So it's an easier thing for a person young entering in.
Mm,
But also, what you said, I think most opinions in our industry ironically comes from people who've never been in the industry, and that's how a lot of things and perceptions work. Be about Noma, be about pay
oh
scales, be
yeah,
about internships. Most of it is coming from people who have never stepped in, which is why we need platforms like these, be it podcasts, be it things less
sure.
professional. But I think that at least the people listening out can know your experience, and that I think that's the best moment for me to hear from you. How was Noma for you? Because I think it was a very iconic moment for Noma as well. Noma achieved it's the number one category in the 50 best with you. You also became a head chef very quick. Tell us about how was Noma for you.
Yeah, no, for me, I mean, it was kind of a crazy experience. When I first went there, I went as, I was able to get a visa to stay there. And
Mm-hmm.
when I first moved to Copenhagen, there was no promise of a position. And I was lucky that, it's rare someone left kind of quickly without notice.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to get a paying position as a chef de partie. And I had a visa. And then basically, long story short, I was there for like 6, 7 months as a chef de partie. And I guess I was like 28, 29. And I just felt like, first of all, like I had never worked in a restaurant like that in every way, shape, or form. The intensity, the expectations from guests, working with a staff that was so international, who had so much experience working in different parts of the world. Like I didn't have that experience working with new ingredients, different techniques, all these things. The list goes on. And after like 6, 7 months, man, I really thought I was like just not doing a good job. Like I thought I sucked. Like literally, I was like, I was embarrassed to the extent that I literally went. This is after really trying to do whatever I could to get there.
Mm-hmm.
I moved there. After 6, 7 months, I went to Matt Orlando, who at the time was the head chef, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
Matt, I don't know what to do. Like I literally feel like I am like a liability to this restaurant. Like I think it was like I had felt this responsibility, like anybody working there. Like this restaurant has such a name, and if you're
Mm-hmm.
working there, you better be able to do the deal. And I felt like I wasn't. So I was like, man, I don't know what to do. Like maybe I should leave. Like I don't know if I can do this. And literally in that conversation, he's like, well, I need to tell you this. In a year, I'm leaving to start my own
Mm-hmm.
restaurant. And we, meaning him and Renee, had decided that they wanted me to become the next head chef. And I was like, equally as excited as I was like, oh my God, like scared. But of
Yeah,
course, you're not going to say no to that. So then it was
of
like,
course.
okay. So then basically for the next year, they really kind of like tried to bring me up to speed. And bringing me up to speed was not just about the food and kind of the place, but really like who are all these people who eat here? The people who've eaten here many
Mm-hmm.
times, the people who are supporters of Noma in the very beginning. And that was such a big part of that restaurant, as you know, like just
Mm-hmm.
understanding all these folks that come around. And also for me, like I was working at a restaurant in Washington, D.C. Like I didn't know who all these chefs were who were coming to eat, and like I didn't know that. I was not like I feel like everybody else in that restaurant, because they were, primarily from different parts of the world, traveled a lot. had worked at a lot of different restaurants. They all knew who all these chefs were and this, that, and this restaurant and that restaurant. I mean, the only reason I even knew what Noma was because someone gave me the Noma book, the gray
Wow.
one.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, this looks amazing. And so like the 50 best list, like I wasn't super familiar about it
Mm-hmm.
when I went there. So it was a big learning curve to get there. And I think one of the biggest hurdles though was that I saw several people in that restaurant who in my mind would have been like the clear choice for that job above me.
Wow.
And I always remember when they announced that I was going to take this job, and it was like crickets. I think it was like confusion. Like the staff was like, I think it was like confusion. Some people I don't, maybe they didn't even know who I was.
Mm-hmm.
It was like kind of awkward because I think there was like, wow, okay, like this guy's Matt Orlando was like the golden child.
Of
You know, he
course. I
had
mean, he's
worked.
been places. Yeah.
Yeah, he was like he was at Per Se, he was at the Fat Duck. He's like this very like he had a presence, you know, he's like the
Mm-hmm.
nicest guy as well, super talented. And so I definitely had really big shoes to fill
Mm-hmm.
and I was super nervous about it, but that's kind of how I got into it. And then once it started, I mean, it was like I think myself it was like a big transitional period. When I became head chef, around a similar time, some other people left. Some of
Mm-hmm.
the guys who were chef de parties became sous chefs. So it's kind of a little bit of like you know, like a
The
new
shuffle of
group.
sorts.
Yeah, so I think we felt a tremendous amount of pressure,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't help that like we all took over. This transition happened in January, coming out of the winter break of 2013,
Mm-hmm.
and that upcoming 50 best, which for what it's worth, all the voting and everything ends in like October. So it was before we took over. But
Mm-hmm.
that upcoming 50 best, we became number two. And as much as like, again, it sounds so silly to even talk about it this way. But of course, for us, we were like, okay, we just like, this is a bad feeling. Like
Yeah.
we lost it. We lost it. That was the feeling,
Mm.
you know? And then, you know, we got it back. We got number one back, but the whole experience there for me was a combination of you know it was intense. I was in a position where I feel like you know the sky was the limit in terms of like there was no like I'm doing this job perfectly. There was always room for improvement, and I think for me that was really good because it pushed me
Mm-hmm.
to get to a place where I never thought I could get. I always tell people like you need to find your Noma because for me
Right.
it pushed me to a place. It showed me what I was capable of doing. And I don't know if I would have ever gotten there on my own, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest. And it was like the greatest gift I could have gotten because it's also what ultimately gave me the confidence to look at myself and get to where I am now. I don't think I would have
Definitely.
ever chosen to work, you know, and do what I do now because I don't know if I would have had the confidence to do that.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, it's a great place to be. I think. I mean, the way you explain intense and the way you've started through the podcast, you've told us of how the kind of restaurants you worked at, and all of them sound intense. And then being in Noma in a place where I don't know how it was back when you were, but when I was there, I mean, intense is intense. But then it's conditions where you have the keys to the restaurant and you are officially working 5 days, but you know if you have prep to do you can enter there whenever
Sure.
you want, and there could be days you have to pick pine needles 2 in the morning and you're doing it. And on top of that, your role of being the head chef and having all the tough conversations with all these rotations and all these things happening and the PR work. So I think it can all be intense. And from that operation, because you have very often said that you did not leave Noma because of burnout, because a lot of people
No,
leave restaurants because of burnout. So that's been one of your statements. And what leads to a person like you to say, this is it in Noma and there is some other idea? Because I know that was Brigade was not the first idea, but why did you say
right.
enough over there?
Yeah, I think as much as I didn't, as much as like I loved working there, and as much as I wouldn't say I burned out, I think that
Mm-hmm.
position, that particular role as the head chef in that restaurant, there's a time limit to it. It's
Mm-hmm.
intense. It takes a toll on you. And I think it was time to move on. And when it was time to move on, it wasn't like it's time to move on. This is what I'm going to do. It's time to
Right.
move on. What am I going to do? And, you know, for what it's worth, like I put my notice in there. When it was time to finally put my notice in, it was a
Okay.
year before I left. So we're talking like, you know, I started having this thought, you know, no, I wouldn't say two
Mm,
years before I left, but like a year and a half.
mm-hmm.
We're talking 18 months before I left. I'm starting to think like, what's next? And I really just had some kind of deep conversations with myself. Like, what am I doing, and what do I like? Why am I in this industry? Like, why is it to
Yeah.
do this? And my first answer was no. I am not in this industry to be the chef of a fine dining restaurant. That's not why I got into cooking. Why did I
Mm-hmm.
get into cooking? I got into cooking because it was like kind of about the power of food, making people happy with food. And as much as, of course, we were making people happy at Noma, that's not the happiness I was talking about. Like, it was more about like, I think one thing that really got me, and now I see more of it in the work we do, is the exchange of cooking for people very often,
Mm-hmm.
where you do in a home setting or in a family setting, where you're cooking for people every day, and by doing that, you're taking care of them, and by doing that, you can really have a real effect on their life, both physically and emotionally. If you're cooking for someone every day versus cooking for someone on a special occasion or a once in a blue moon thing. So like that's kind of where it started. Like I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be
Mm-hmm.
in a position where the food that I'm responsible for creating is really having a real effect on people's lives. And to do that, we need to be cooking for people often. And then it was like, okay, well, like these are the questions. I think if you answer these questions, you start to figure out where you want to go. Who do you want to
Right.
cook for? Who do you want to cook for? Do you want to, and this is like the thing you hear a lot about, of course, from fine dining chefs. I was tired, like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard this from chefs who are applying to our positions. Like, I am tired for cooking for rich people. Now,
Mm,
look, I like to go out to eat at nice restaurants. I am not rich. I will
mm-hmm.
spend money on those places because I enjoy eating there. I enjoy getting, what I will say is there's no question that when you're at a place like Noma, there are days where you're working really hard and there's a lot of emotions flying and you hear some comment from a guest like like you could tell like they could care less about the dining
Yeah.
experience. They're there to check it off a list. It's pretty frustrating. It's pretty demoralizing. So there are other restaurants where, trying your best and you're cooking and you're doing this and then like a guest is like complains about this or something happens. So I think there's a lot of that feeling in high-end restaurants where people are like chefs are like, I work so hard and for what? So
Mm,
I get that. I get that. But for me, it was more the other way. It's like I don't want to cook for these people. It's not about I don't want to cook for these people.
mm-hmm.
And the same thing, it's not that I don't want to work in restaurants. And I think that's dangerous too. I think it's a little dangerous when you're doing something just because you don't want to do something else. I don't want to cook for rich people.
Yeah, it's like a rebellious child,
I
Like your
don't
mother's
want to
offering you
work.
food, and like, I don't want to eat the food. Even if you're
Yeah.
hungry, you just take in a position that you want to be
Yeah,
rebellious instead of.
right. It's like you need to find what you want to do. It's not
Mm-hmm.
about what you don't like. Answering, knowing that you don't want to cook in a restaurant, knowing that you don't want to cook for a certain type. Okay, that's good, but you need to find out what you want to do. And for me, I know I wanted to cook for people who needed it. I wanted to cook for
Mm,
people, and sometimes needed it doesn't always mean like obviously in a lot of ways where we're cooking, we are cooking. It's unfortunate, but it is the fact of the matter. Particularly in
mm-hmm.
schools, there are a lot of kids who absolutely depend on those meals that we're cooking because they're not eating elsewhere, and that is the fact of the matter. But also, like people who need it, people who depend on it in the sense of like institutions is an interesting place because these are folks who don't even really have choice in the matter. Like in a lot of institutions, like the food that's available to you is what you're eating. And
Mm-hmm.
even if you might have some money, but like depending on the circumstances, like that's the food you're eating. And so for me, I wanted to be in a position where we were a part of cooking food that, again, people were really kind of depending on those meals and they didn't really have much of a choice in the matter. And that was the next kind of answer to the question. So that was the kickoff. Like, what am I like? How do you do that? How do
Mm-hmm.
you check those boxes? And my first idea, because again, I don't think institutional food in general could have been further down the road, like from my mind of like a real career. It was like maybe I can start like a fast casual fast food restaurant that the price is low. It could compete
Mm-hmm.
with, a McDonald's, but it's a wholesome meal. So people who, don't have a huge budget can go there, they can eat there regularly. That was kind of the starting point. And then there's a few things that derailed that for me. One of which was I think it would be very challenging to do that and
Yeah.
compete with a McDonald's because obviously the scale at which a McDonald's is and the economy of scale and all these things. But the real one that kind of did it for me was food waste.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much food waste. And, I find it always interesting because, there's always like new chains coming out, new like restaurant chains, new fast casual chains popping up, and they pop up and they have a lot of values and they're very, they're sustainable and responsible. But to me, like if you're new, you can't be that responsible or sustainable because like you're building new buildings, you're cooking more food that wasn't being cooked before. Surely
Right.
now you're wasting more food that wasn't. So I didn't like the idea of that. I was like, we already have a lot of food. There are already a lot of kitchens. Like, do we need more kitchens? Do we need more food? And then at the time, this is like 2015, and the Obama administration was in the White House in the United States, and Michelle Obama was like a huge proponent of school food, and she
Mm-hmm.
talked about it a lot. Therefore, you heard it about it a lot. And I think it was like an article that crossed my computer screen, and
Okay.
it was like just like a flash of like that's it, institutional food. It wasn't even like school food. It was like institutional food.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, it literally checks all the boxes. The kitchens, there's kitchens everywhere in schools, in hospitals, in senior centers, in prisons. Most of those kitchens are underutilized, under-equipped, in bad condition, but they're there. You don't need to build new kitchens. There's tons of kitchens. There are people working in these spaces. Most of those people have not been trained to cook. The food is already being made. So we're not making more food. It's just that the food is not particularly good oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got people there who depend on those meals and they have to eat those meals. And they're there every day and you're cooking for them every day. It literally checked every single box. Like I'll tell you, I went from not really knowing to like knowing in like 24 hours. I was like, that's it, institutional food. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, and chefs don't even work in these spaces, really. A lot of chefs do not choose to work in these spaces. So the whole impetus of Brigade was just that. It was like, we're going to get more chefs to work in these spaces. How we're going to do it, how does that look? No idea. But that is what we're going to do. And that was it. That was it.
Yeah, wow. I mean, and I think what I mean, it's an inspirational story. I think it's also funny because most of these great stories, even like startups, even all these great ideas, unfortunately, seem like so obvious, and then you look around and it's like, oh, how come nobody's doing anything about it? That's
Sure.
the one thing with most common great ideas, you know. And for me, what I see from you, all the work that you do, I see very constantly like you're somebody who's not pivoting from that message. Your message is very clear of like how to motivate people to get into these kitchens.
Yeah,
So I would like to hear from you, like, how do you do this? Because how can we do this? That on this podcast, for example, I speak to Pat Clifford, who says that 1 million people every day open a Lay's packet. He works for PepsiCo as the R&D chef. He says, how am I not as important as Rene is? Or how do people not know my name? Because I think this is one thing also people,
sure.
especially chefs, look for recognition of some sorts, if not of them per se, maybe the collective as such. You know how chefs coming from restaurants in Copenhagen feel like a collective and feel that's a great place to be working at. Or last week we had Sandhya, who's working for Future Food Institute, creating regenerative economies, regenerative cities, re-educating people about food in schools, food in cities, how it can work.
Amazing.
What are the things that you think, Dan, that we need to do to be able to appreciate these professions so people feel motivated and Brigade's job becomes a little more easier?
Yeah, I honestly, I think there's only so much that we can do. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I feel that way. Obviously, as someone who has followed us on Instagram, I'm like it's like a broken record. We're always
Mm-hmm.
looking for people, always advertising. I honestly think that and the gentleman that you were just speaking of, like the reason
Mm-hmm.
that nobody knows who he is and people know who Renee is certainly recognition. No one's going to think of the R&D chef of PepsiCo as being a good chef. No
Right.
one's going to think of the chef of a school as a good chef. No one's going to, that's just what it is. But if you're
Mm-hmm.
the chef of the best restaurant in the world, obviously you're a great chef. That's who people want to know about. So that is just how we recognize things. And recognition is awards, I say this all the time, and I get mixed feedback via social media, but I think awards and the way they're set up don't make any sense.
Uh-huh.
First of all, I don't even think they're like valid. Like this, different people get the awards every year,
Yeah.
which means that they're not, because in most places, if they were truly giving the awards out to people who deserve them, you would probably get a lot of people getting the same awards over and over again. But if you give the awards out to the same people and over again, then most people get tired of that. But if you
Yeah.
give the awards out to different people, then more people are interested in those awards because they've received it too. So it's a bit of a game to keep people engaged in the award system, but then the awards are not recognizing anything else really outside of restaurants. You get a few kind of auxiliary awards here and there where they give out something, but there's no real awards going out to people outside of restaurants. It's a very narrow scope. Why aren't there
Uh-huh.
awards for food service in general? I think the media goes the same way. Sure, we get as a company because of my background, and that's the only reason
Yeah.
we get recognition. People do pieces on us, people write about us, people have written about me. I'm on this podcast. But I think that generally, like even school food, like people write about school food now. At the start of
Uh-huh.
school in the United States, people want to write a story now. That's it.
Okay.
You want to write a story about school food right now. But if more people are writing about this and that, like the other day, the biggest story in food in the United States, and probably one of the biggest stories in food in the world, was that 11 Madison Park is going to start
Yeah.
serving meat again. Like, who cares? Who
Exactly.
cares? Like, it doesn't. It's like so stupid. Like if they want to do that, like let them do it. Like it doesn't even matter. Like it's literally meaningless. It's meaningless if they want to do that. It's one restaurant. Let them do it. And all these other things are happening. All the people you just mentioned and the things they're involved in. Think of a PepsiCo. If
Uh-huh.
they change something just incrementally, if they incrementally take a little bit of sugar out of something, how impactful that is versus one restaurant going vegan. It literally has no, it doesn't even matter. So it's like, it's just the recognition of things. And for me, anything happening at scale is the most interesting. I am so
Uh-huh.
fascinated and interested in people doing things at scale, and I wish there was just more conversations, more talk. But until the average person looks at a chef who works in a school with respect, it's
Uh-huh.
going to be hard to get chefs to say, I want to do this because and it's a lot to ask a chef. It's easy for me. I was a chef at Noma. It's easy for me to say, yeah, I'm a chef in a school and people respect me. It's not
Uh-huh.
easy for everyone. And I know the chefs on our team, it's like, it could be challenging. Some of them, when they go to make this decision, I think it's a hard decision to make. And I think if we gave these positions more respect and recognized them as, wow, that's a really cool profession, more people would be quick to do it. But until we do that, I think it's a lot to ask somebody to just jump into a profession that receives no respect.
No.
That's all you got to say. Like, that's a hard, hey, do this job that nobody respects.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Or you could stay in the job that you're in where people think it's really cool. Like your
Uh-huh.
family thinks it's really cool. Your friends think it's really cool. The general population thinks it's cool. You have a chance to win an award.
Uh-huh.
Actually, you know what? Do this job where people are going to say, really? You're doing that? What's that all about? You no chance of getting awards, no chance of recognition. Like, just if you frame it that way, it's like pretty obvious. Like, that's a hard thing.
Definitely. The impact is, for myself as somebody who was working in these restaurants and then now working in projects where we go to Egypt and create a menu that these people can follow, which is based on the Mediterranean diet. So people in Portugal and Spain eat the same food as Egypt and Lebanon because they're on the sea, on the same seabed. And this is so much more valuable where you create an energy bar from food waste, which will maybe be the only source of protein they get in that day. And I think it's unfortunate that people don't see value in this, and it's not only causing the fact that people are not motivated to join these kind of institutions, but the other ripple effect is that people behind these organizations, the people funding, say, a food tech company or a big FMCG like Pepsi, we've already named them, or Nestle, and people like this, they might not even look at chefs as their main people that they need to recruit. And they won't put
Sure,
money there. They won't even hunt for people
sure.
because now, if it's just about formulas, we need a food scientist to do it, and same with institution catering. I think it's funny because I wanted to ask you this as well, that when first you start approaching these restaurants, were they actually seeing that chefs, did they actually know what chefs can contribute? Like, are they looking at chefs like, if I want to build a building, I want an architect, but yeah, I also want labor which has the hand to put those cement blocks together. So when you approach these places, I think from what I get from institutional catering is they think these people, this job anybody can do it, is to follow something, and most times they won't even follow it. They'll just do their own thing, but they'll serve
Yeah.
food out.
Well, I will say it's a really great question, and I think your inclination is right in the sense of even the people who reach out to us who are
Mm-hmm.
interested in working with us as chefs, I think a lot of them don't really realize the value that chefs can provide until we're underway. Again, as I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned earlier, it's like they see chefs like they can train people and they could come up with recipes, but they don't think of all the other things when it comes to food service that
Mm-hmm.
chefs can really think through, that it's just so important. And one thing that I had to deal with early on, and we still deal with it, like, for example, the amount of money that we pay a chef
Right.
is very competitive to any job out there as a chef. And that's important to me. But sometimes I will be speaking, sometimes, not all the time. We have a lot of people who see the value in what we do. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I'll have a conversation with someone who is a food service director of a school district. And in some cases, depending on the school district, those people can make a very good salary. It's an important position. If you have a 30, 40 schools in a school district and one person who oversees the food service program, it's a lot of responsibility. It would
Mm-hmm.
not be uncommon for that person to make $140,000, $130,000, a great benefit package. And then I'll have this conversation about our services and they'll ask me like how much does it cost, and I'll tell them and I say this is based off of what we pay our chefs,
Mm-hmm.
and in a lot of our jobs now that salary is like $90,000 a year, and then it's benefits and all these things, but they're like $90,000 a year, and I'm like, yeah, like, and I'm like, of course I wouldn't say this to them, but I'm like, you make $130,000, like,
Yeah.
like you think this person's
Nothing's wrong with
job is
that.
like, and the people we hire have a lot of experience.
Yeah.
Well, we hire like really strong people who have great experience, and so again, understanding like the perception of what a chef is, the
Mm-hmm.
value of a chef, what a chef is capable of. I think you're completely right in saying that chefs in a lot of places are undervalued and in a lot of settings are undervalued. But what I will say, and I think this is really important, is I do think a lot of chefs, too many chefs,
Mm-hmm.
are not very well-rounded professionals.
Right.
You can get a chef who's running a kitchen, who's running a three Michelin star kitchen. They don't know how to write an email. They don't know how to
Mm-hmm.
communicate properly. They don't know how to manage properly because they don't really even need to manage. No, they have no, like, their skill set is very limited. So if you
Mm-hmm.
took that person who is running a three Michelin star restaurant, and so let's say, one of the top benchmarks of success in our industry or in the restaurant industry, and put them into a more kind of organized environment that we're talking about, they could fail miserably because
Mm-hmm.
their communication skills they don't, like, there's so many deficiencies because I think professional development in general in primarily restaurants, primarily fine dining restaurants, is non-existent. Like if you go to a
Mm-hmm.
corporate setting, a hotel, a bigger corporate environment, there usually is development because that's part of what they do. That's the expectation. But in independent restaurants, it is very rare, from my experience and people I've spoken to, and from interviewing a ton of people for these jobs that we offer, that people are getting any kind of training on anything. You show up at the restaurant, and you know this, you show up at the restaurant, you're expected to figure it out. You figure it
Mm-hmm.
out. If you become a manager of some sort, a sous chef, a chef, you're just learning from the person above you. Hopefully, you're learning from somebody who's actually a good manager. Most likely, you're not. You're learning from somebody who's not a very good manager because they didn't learn from anyone else. There's someone who just yells, doesn't know how to manage properly. It's a bad circle. So, to your point again, I think there are a lot of chefs out there, and I've spoken to school districts
Mm-hmm.
who, and this contributes, I'm sure, to their perception of chefs, who have had really negative experiences with chefs where they've gone out themselves, had an interview process themselves, and have hired a chef to work for them directly without anyone else helping them figure that out. And they've had horrible experiences. Chefs who are just not very nice people, who've yelled, who were not flexible. So I just think that in some cases, I think some of these folks are probably right because
Understandably, yeah.
level. like chefs, I am not thrilled by the level of professionalism across the board when it comes to chefs.
Uh-huh.
Like, I think a lot of chefs are only good for cooking and develop, coming up, not even coming up with a recipe. You know this. A lot of chefs
Yeah,
don't even know how to come up with a recipe. They just cook
definitely.
food. They can't even follow a recipe. They just want to cook.
Uh-huh.
And I just think that that takes away from our profession.
Uh-huh.
Like, there are chefs who are obsessed with the craft of
Yeah.
cooking. That is great. I almost equate that to being a home cook.
Uh-huh.
But if you want to be a chef and run a business and manage people, there are other skill sets you need to be well versed in. And I feel like a lot of folks, and I don't know what you think on that, but I just think a lot of folks just never develop in that area. And you don't
No,
have
they don't.
to
And I
be
mean,
successful.
definitely. No, for me, actually, I look back at it now because now I travel very often for work, and this is me traveling on company's budget. So I'm like, okay, you know what? I want to go dine out on these occasions, explore the local gastronomy. Like now, I go to Mexico tomorrow, but most often, I don't end up going at these fine dining restaurants. Is because I feel I very much know what's happening in there. I very much know there's only one creative person who's leading the team and leading the ship, and then the rest of them think they're being creative, but they're actually just mimicking because their job is to mimic, and mimicking is the
Sure.
best they can do at that job.
Right.
Which is why I seek out more people who have like also not mostly like I try to now look out of food as an avenue. I'm looking into tech a lot on how things on other industries how they get creative, and I feel very often most chefs are not capable of doing the things you're talking about. And I feel in the beginning of the podcast I was interviewing you with the purpose of understanding what Brigade does with the matchmaking process of like how it
Mm.
connects these two subsets, but I feel now that's for me after listening this hour long conversation is the least important part, because I think the processes you do in the way of the grooming of the chefs, of I think one thing the chefs do not know is to ask what they're worth. I think no chef I know knows, okay, I'm worth this. There are very few exceptions, those who are into like say consultancy or like private dining and things like that, who know their price and they know how to professionally ask for it and say no, because we are trained to say yes to everything principally.
Yeah,
So
for
I think
sure.
that job what
That's
you
a
do
good
is
point.
I think that job that you do as Brigade, to put this to make a profile, to groom them to it, and to tell people what they're worth. I think that
Right.
sets the benchmark, at least in the people you're impacting. So
I
that's,
think
yeah,
that's
for me
right.
that's a beautiful takeaway.
We talk about it a lot. Like, we charge a certain amount for our services to school districts, and we know for those school districts that that feels expensive. And in turn, we need to make sure we are providing as much value as possible. And the way we do that is through our chefs. Therefore, our
Uh-huh.
chefs need to match that. And if there's something they need to work on, they need to work on it. So it's like it goes both ways. It's like, you are worth more than this, than what you
Uh-huh.
think you are, but you also need to like round out your knowledge set and your skill set, and you need to in your skill set, you need to like match that. And I just think that a lot of that unfortunately just doesn't really happen. And I think a lot of those opportunities are not there for a lot of people working in restaurants. And that's also a symptom of the fact that you usually have a couple people in charge. And if those
Uh-huh.
people don't leave, you're never going to move up. You're not going to, but I just wish, and I don't know why this is such a unique thing. And I said this the other day on one of my posts,
Uh-huh.
and a gentleman asked, I said, I rather go to a restaurant that spends less money on ingredients,
Yeah.
served conventional ingredients, and spent more money on their staff. And someone in the comments was like, well, how do you invest in your staff more than just making sure there's a good working environment and paying them a good wage? I was like, training,
Definitely.
professional development. It's not just about the wage and making sure it's a good environment. You should demand getting developed. If you go work anywhere, I don't. It doesn't matter if it's a restaurant or this or that. And I feel like people's perspective, if it's a restaurant, is like, well, by working here, you're gonna learn. That's not good enough. Like, you need to deliberately put and invest into people, train people. That is your responsibility as an employer in any job. And I just find it, to me, it's very frustrating to think that that's not really the case in restaurants. And it's always pointing to that it's not within the budget. Like, the restaurant
Uh-huh.
model doesn't work. Well, again, if you spend a little less money on the fancy ingredients, you could spend more money on training. And that means you have to do things differently than maybe you want to.
Uh-huh.
But either,
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I just, this is something that's very frustrating to me, because I mean, there's a lot of amazing people out there working in restaurants who
Uh-huh.
are never going to be given the proper opportunity to grow. They're just not. They're never going to grow. They're going to work restaurant to restaurant to restaurant to restaurant. No one's ever going to, they might move up and they might move up, but no one's ever investing in them. And that's a real shame. It's a real shame.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty flat line, and in most cases, a flat line because of what you say, and it's unfortunate because you do not compromise when it comes to ingredient. You do not compromise when it goes to paying your purveyors or charging a higher bill or raising the price of the menu. But the compromise always comes down to you could get away with, because it comes from the principal idea that a chef can be replaced and it's just two hands putting things together and it can be
Yeah.
replaced. So that's why I think this investment doesn't come. And that's, yes, the rotational rate is high. Yes, the younger generation is asking for stuff before they are ready to show what they can commit. But I guess that doesn't give you enough an excuse to say, you know what, you're not gonna train stuff. And I mean, I would love to go on with this conversation, Dan. I think I could have another 2 hours of episode, but I think we could do a few more episodes and then get you back on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But before I just have two last questions before we wrap this up. One is principally I'm very interested about knowing what's next for Brigade, because you had this summit recently. You're also building a lot of things parallelly. What are your view of the future of Brigade? How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like I think this past like year and a half, we grew a lot, and we're at a place as a growing business where I think a lot of the systems and things we had in place prior are not working as well as they did before, and they need to change. And we spent the last year to 6 months changing those things and kind of upgrading and reevaluating the way we work. And for me, I think this year, and it's already started because the school year in the West Coast of the United States started a couple weeks ago. We're already seeing kind of like a better version of what we do. And I think I'm excited just this year. Every year since we started, we've grown exponentially. And this is no different this year. We have 20 more chefs this year than we did last year. And probably next year we'll have a 25, 30, 40 more chefs than we do this year. But I think for me, I'm looking at this year as being the year that we really kind of like not worry too much. Like I think we're always looking for like the newest thing and like how can we change a little bit. I think we have a really great thing going for us, and I think we need to like just do it as best as we can. I think that I'm a firm believer that the kind of work that we do, it either keeps going and keeps growing and gains momentum, not just for Brigade, but for everybody in our country. More people think school food's important. More people think institutional food is important. Chefs are more interested in working in it. This has a little momentum right now, a little momentum. And that either is going to keep growing or it's just going to fade away and fizzle out. And I think in order for it to keep growing, we need to show the best version of what's possible. And that's like make the best school food that's out there. Show that being a chef in a school is a great career. And we need that to be out there and we need people to see it. So I think for me right now, the focus is like we just need to do this better than we've ever done it. And we need people to see it, and that's going to help this thing grow because with everything that's going on
Mm.
politically and I think it's very fragile. This is very fragile, and I don't want to take our current success of growing as for
Hmm.
granted. So for me, what's ahead for us is really just hunkering down and showing the best version of what we've been working. I mean, we've been doing this for 9 years. It feels like that's such a long time, but honestly, only in the last 2 to 3 years, I feel like, have we really started to do it the way that makes sense. And I'm excited to really put that out there this year.
No, I mean, amen to that. I mean, I really hope. I mean, 2 years ago, I mean, of course, we always had the Paul Bocuse of the world, but we didn't have. I mean, 20 years ago, nobody knew fine dining restaurants as they are today, or nobody knew about a show like
True.
MasterChef, or nobody thought a show like Bear could garner audience to the level it has gone today. But I mean, these things have done good and bad both ways. But I hope whatever it takes, whether it's pop culture, whether it's TV, media, whatever it takes, this behind the scenes of what happens in institution catering and how important the role of chefs in there is. I hope it comes out to the eyes of the ordinary people, because I feel the people. I mean, people have to wake up and realize the job that you're doing. How many people today are going to bed knowing that their kids were eating at a catering where a chef was inserted thanks to an initiative by somebody who had this visionary idea, you know. So I hope people realize how important this is, and I feel sooner and later people are getting more aware. Sometimes I also start doubting if people know more or they know lesser by when they start reading ingredients, if they
Yeah.
actually know what they're reading. And the same comes down to the job that you're doing. I feel it's just what you mentioned, the political scenario, how things are happening in the world right now. There's so many things which get more priority than the one single thing that all of us put inside our body
Right.
apart from pharmaceutical drugs. That's the only other thing you put inside your body. And I wish there was more attention to these things now. But for now, I think we can only wish, and we can only like hope to support people like you and stories like yours.
Thank you.
We have had great people on the podcast. Next week we have actually not Matt Orlando but Maximilian from the same company, from the Endless Core,
Oh,
the kind
cool.
of efforts
Nice.
they're doing.
Very
So yeah,
cool.
it's really nice to see how all of us on different parts of the globe are doing these efforts from our kitchen past, from our restaurant past, to somehow contribute to food. And my last question for you, Dan, would be, people who are listening to this, like, think of Dan, who was this before this 18-month period in Noma, thinking of, you know what, I entered this restaurant, I became a head chef,
Yep.
I've done all that it takes. What do I do next? Or I have an idea, but I feel that I work 16 hours a day. I'm doing enough. People are kind of talking about me. I'm getting interviewed. I'm kind of famous. There is all the things that I could look for, and still there is this, not discontent, but awareness that I could contribute more. What would you say to a person like that? Like, what could like push them over that cliff and make that move?
I mean, my thing is just like, if presumably if you're having those thoughts at all, you're probably not
Uh-huh.
completely content with your work, with your life, and that's not going to change.
Uh-huh.
It's not going to change. It's going to just continue year after year. And there's going to be highlights that maybe make you feel a little better about the situation, but it's not going to change. And if you want to live your life, if you want to live the rest of your life where most days you're not content with your life and what you're doing, and you're okay with a few days here and there of recognition or a story being written about you, and that's enough to get you through, then great. But what I would say is it's never going to change. It's never going to change, and there's never a good time. It's never going to feel comfortable to, be like, I need to like just start doing something else. It's never going to
Uh-huh.
happen. There's never going to be a moment where, and people say this all the time, like there's never the right time, and that's the truth. There's never going to be a moment where it feels good to just say, you know what, I'm going to have a wholesale change of what I'm doing. And I think there's a very reasonable and practical way to approach these things. I think you just, in your head, you need to make that decision. Like, what I'm currently doing is not the answer because I'm not happy doing this. And be honest with yourself and stick to yourself and promise yourself that you're going to figure out what is the plan to move beyond this. You don't need to do anything crazy or rash. You just need to come up with a plan and then do it. Figure out what the next step is. And the next step, like in my case, the next step was it. The next step doesn't need to be it. The next step might be the next step towards it. But
Uh-huh.
you got to make a change. You got to move. And I know too many people who've never made a change. And you know what? They have great days and they're excited about certain things, but they're not content. They're not happy. It doesn't go away. Like you're never going to, like, that's not going to change. So, my advice to people, if you're listening to this, is just like, you know. You don't need anyone to tell you. Like, you're not happy and you need to start making that change. And you're the only one that's going to do it.
No, thank you, Dan. I couldn't have said it better. And I feel people who are through these emotions, and all of us have been through these steps, and sometimes even like very often in life, not just once one pivot, but there are
Of
like calls
course.
like this where you know it. So I think what you've said just connects very much to me personally, and I feel a lot of people listening to this, it connects. And I would always say that I would tell people to follow your work. I will put your links down there so people see
Thank
what
you.
else is out there. I feel it's also these inspirations, not just this podcast, but also seeing the small efforts that you do and see that somebody can leave behind a past which many people aspire to make that their mission of life. But there is a lot more to food beyond just fine dining restaurants.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you so much for your time, Dan. I'll let you go from here, and
Thank
it's
you.
been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise. Thanks so much.